Welcome, Swagatham. At long last, the feared, dreaded thing has happened. Israel and Iran are on a war path. At this point in time, it's very difficult to predict exactly what the outcome of this most unfortunate, ill conceived adventure would be. Why it is difficult to predict such developments of immense significance is a subject I propose to deal with independently in another video. What I propose to do at the present time is to provide a kind of perspective for all those who wish to think at a higher level or deeper level, if you like, on not only this event but also events of similar scope and size. And I have to admit right at the outset that this video is not meant for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I wouldn't mind it if only 5 people see it or 3 people see it. This video is meant only for those who have some substance, some inclination to wrestle with ideas, some desire to deepen their understanding, and some motivation to develop a larger than ordinary perspective on whatever happens in this world. In other words, those who want to penetrate the facade of reality and get at the deeper patterns working behind them. And in doing so, I'm going to take the help largely of a German philosopher, quite familiar to all of us, someone I very particularly trust when it comes to matters of universal significance, that is Immanuel Kant. And I'm going to derive material almost entirely from a very short work of Immanuel Kant, titled, if my memory serves me right, Idea for a Universal History to a Cosmopolitan End. Idea for a Universal History to a Cosmopolitan End. I think this was published towards the end of the 18th century, 1795, around that time. Now, I'm going to rely or I'm going to introduce to you mainly the 4 initial paradigms or maxims or propositions. In fact, Kant uses the word proposition uh, to constitute the framework for our thinking. Now, Kant's idea here is to give us, or to evolve, or to suggest a perspective from which universal history may be understood or even be recorded. And obviously, the events that we are trying to understand, and I propose to do many more videos on this particular event, namely the Israel-Iran standoff or war. So the idea is to develop a perspective for understanding large events of immense universal or global significance. And therefore, those who have such interest will find the substance of this video rewarding. Others will find it extremely burdensome, if you like, taxing, mind-boggling, etc., etc. Now, let me quickly mention the 4 initial propositions by Kant. Kant's propositions in Idea for a Universal History to a Cosmopolitan End. The first proposition is that all the natural abilities of an organism, he's of course keeping human beings at the center of his thought, will develop to their maximum potential depending on their appointed end. here he is referring to our natural abilities. For example, the ability to walk, the ability to talk, the ability to handle day-to-day affairs, so on and so forth. So all these things will develop to their maximum scope depending on the appointed purpose. For example, our ability to walk will develop only to the extent that it is actually necessary for the context in which we find ourselves and therefore there is a limitation to the speed at which we walk. If we were living in a completely different context, maybe we would have walked at the rate of 20 kilometers per hour or 60 kilometers per hour, we do not know. But within the present context, the maximum scope is that we walk, say, at the rate of 6 kilometers per hour. And therefore, that's the limit, and it will develop only up to that point. All our natural abilities will develop only to the maximum point as decided by the purpose to be served by it. So that's the first principle or first maxim or first proposition. The second proposition is that this is as far as the natural abilities are concerned. But as far as the development of reason is concerned, reason is the ability to relate to the larger aspects of life which are not handled and cannot be handled by the mere instinct of various creatures. So beyond the instinctual dimension. So the rational capacity of humankind will develop to its full potential not in the individual but in the species. So in each individual, reason will develop only up to a small extent, whereas the natural capacities, as I mentioned already based on Kant, like walking, talking, etc., or dealing with our day-to-day affairs, our hand-to-mouth existence, they will develop to their full extent as required in the present context, in the given context. That's the difference between natural abilities and rational abilities. And the rational capacity will develop to its full extent only in the species, in humankind. And therefore, in order to develop our rational capacities, we have to abide in the humankind as a whole. If you really chop up humankind into various segments and play one against the other, then you will not develop your rational capacity, you will only develop your irrational capacity. And that's why every sensible person feels unhappy about the fragmentation of the human family, or as in the words of Rabindranath Tagore in hymn number 35 of Gitanjali, the fragmentation by narrow domestic walls. See, they're all narrow. The function of narrow domestic walls is to fragment humanity, and its end result, according to Kant, is the inhibition of the development of our rational faculty. As long as we live divided in our various enclaves, separated from each other or in tension with each other or hating each other, then our rational capacity will never develop. So that's the second proposition. The third proposition is that the credit for developing these other than natural abilities, for example, rational ability, etc., beyond the instinctual, whatever other, for example, the capacity to think, knowledge, ability to process ideas, the ability to deal wisely, sensibly with individual situation, collective situation, all these larger faculties, whoever develops the capacity, they will not develop automatically, unlike our physical natural abilities. Whoever develops those capacities is entitled to taking the credit for it. In other words, all these capacities will develop only according to individual efforts. Individual efforts. Nobody can help you in this respect. You have to develop all these for yourself, and therefore the credit for developing them will belong entirely to you. For example, nobody can, by developing the capacity to deal with issues rationally, impart that to you through laying on of hands or touch or giving you an embrace or expressing some pious wish that you be the most rational creature in the world. Nobody can transmit the benefit of the great achievements one has achieved to another person. If you happen to be living with a Nobel laureate, that person cannot transmit to you the great achievement that he has gained for himself. He alone can take the credit for it. He alone will benefit from it. So that's the third proposition. In other words, the implication here is that each one of us has to develop our larger than instinctual or habitual or natural abilities. Nobody else can do that for us. And you have an indication of this. Christians don't realize this, but you have an insight of this kind in Jesus' parable of the 10 maidens. But it's not the occasion for me to go into interpreting that parable. Maybe I should do it on another occasion. So that's the third proposition. The fourth proposition, and that is the proposition that directly relevant to the issue that we are hence from today onwards trying to understand. And therefore, let's try and understand it as clearly as we can. The fourth proposition is that the means appointed for the development of these specifically individual, larger than natural or instinctual abilities, and this is where Kant's profound wisdom comes. The means appointed to develop these faculties is what is called the unsocial sociability of the species. Now, that might sound a little confusing, but it is simple. I shall explain it presently. The means appointed to enable us as members of the species to develop our individual capacities of the kind that is larger than or different to the natural capacities is the unsocial sociability of our species. Now, let's try and understand what Kant means by unsocial sociability. The first principle is something that everyone knows. Human beings are social animals. All of us need human society. Or in the Bible, we read that after creating Adam, God realizes it is not good that Adam be alone. It is not good that human beings be alone. So we are meant to live in company. We are meant to live in society. This much is clear. I don't think there will be any dispute on the subject. Of course, there are individuals who want to live alone. For example, in ancient days, the rishis, the seers, the great sannyasis, the great ascetics, they disappeared from society, went and lived on top of the mountains or went retreated deep into the forest. These are exceptions rather than the rule. We're talking about the general principle. So we are all meant to live in society. At the same time, every individual experiences a state of tension with the society to which he tries to belong. He has to belong. So, as far as the relationship between the individual and the society is concerned, he needs to belong, but he cannot belong entirely. This is our problem. Please register it clearly. We cannot bear, this is exactly what Kant says, we cannot bear to live without the society, nor can we bear the society. We cannot endure to live without the society. At the same time, we cannot endure the society either. Now, why is this paradoxical, rather cruel, unfortunate arrangement made? Because whether you like it or not, it's only within this arrangement that individual faculties will develop, those special faculties. In other words, Kant is saying that if a person is living in comfort, without having to face any difficulty, any inconvenience, any challenge, any hindrance, then it's bad for him because his larger faculties will not develop. In coming to this conclusion, Kant has a very profound sense of history. He knows, as we also know, that human beings or members of the human family have developed in varying ways and to varying degrees depending on the degree of challenges they have had to face. For example, If you ask Niraj Chowdhury, I hope you're familiar with the name of Niraj Chowdhury, whose views on India have always been controversial. He would say Indians are lazy by nature because we live in a temperate climate where survival is not very difficult. Whereas people living in extreme cold climates, they have to struggle very hard in order to survive. And therefore, they had to develop those extra abilities. Or we are familiar with the story of Tarzan. Tarzan grew up in the forest, and therefore he had to develop extraordinary physical skills. Now, you don't have to develop physical skills of that kind when you live in an ordered society, and therefore you don't develop. So, the extent to which the capacity that you develop within yourself and the extent to which you develop them depends on the resistance, the difficulty, the pressure, the opposition that you confront, and therefore the struggle that you have to live with. And therefore, it's good for us to have difficulties in life. So, this nature by its wisdom has created this arrangement. This is exactly what Kant says. And in fact, if I may recall, he says something like this: man, by his inclination, wants to live in peace. But nature has willed that human beings should rather attain greater dignity than peace. Surely these are the two words he uses. Nature, human beings, by inclination, want to live in peace. That is clear to everyone. However, in order to ensure that individuals develop their special capacities to a great extent, nature has willed that human beings should rather live in peacelessness, in conflict, in difficulty, facing odds, etc., etc., in tensions of various kinds, privations, dangers, tensions of various kinds, rather than live in peace. Because if you live in this kind of peace, what Kant calls pastoral peace, the peace that you find in say serene village areas, where apparently there is no conflict, you live happily there or peacefully there. He says that will not contribute to your dignity. Your dignity depends on the extent to which you develop yourself, and the only way you can develop these faculties, these additional faculties, is by accepting the condition laid down for it by nature, that you have to live in a state of conflict, of tension, of peacelessness. This is Kant's view. And therefore, the point by extension, Kant, like Hegel, believed that wars are an essential condition of our terrestrial existence. Wars are inevitable in this world. Now, am I advocating that all of us should live in tension all the time? No. I do not go to the extent of saying that we all need to place ourselves in a situation of chronic warfare or fights or tensions. I would rather look at this Kantian position from the perspective of Jesus Christ, who said that you should realize the blessedness of being in a situation of suffering. In the Beatitudes, with which the Sermon on the Mount opens, Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil falsely against you for my sake, for great is your reward in heaven." Now, in the context that Kant provides, we can understand the historical truthfulness of the words of Jesus Christ, which otherwise we cannot understand. I guarantee that most Christians do not have a clue as to what this means. Why does Paul rejoice in the privilege he had to suffer inordinately for the sake of Jesus Christ? Paul understood this principle. So, the blessedness of suffering for a righteous cause, Suffering for one's stupidity is very different. Let's make a clear distinction that suffering for one's stupidity does not contribute to one's higher development. In fact, it degrades you. But suffering for a higher cause. That's why Jesus says, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil or make you suffer for my sake, for a higher cause. Then great is your reward. What is your reward? Spiritually, the only reward is the development of your personality, the unusual or unique development of your personality, or development of those unique aspects, typically characteristic, unique aspects of your personality, which otherwise will never develop. All right. Now, therefore, when we look at keeping this as at the back of our minds, now I realize it's already 20 minutes. I will not say much more about the Israel-Iran war in the present unit, but let me say only this much, that given what has happened in the last, say, at least 20 years, the present confrontation between these two antagonists, shown, confirmed, incorrigible antagonist, was a historical necessity. If you recall, about a year ago, I shared a video with all of you, and that video was about Israel attacking Gaza and then also attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in that video, I said that it is an absolute necessity. It is a historical imperative, or it cannot but happen in that manner, that there is a war eventually between Israel and Iran. And at that time, because of my historical naivete, historical foolishness, I said that the war between Israel and Iran, or in fact, the way I put it was like this: Israel will attack Iran within 3 months of settling the Hezbollah issue in Lebanon. That's what I said at that time. I was wrong. It took much more time. That's because Israel has had to prepare this in very, very detail, and Israel had to also undertake back channel diplomacies, had to bring America online with it, aligned with it, etc. So it took much more time than I had imagined, but I was absolutely right, and I knew I would be right, that Israel-Iran war was inevitable. Now, why is this inevitable? For the time being, I will only mention this and then I close. And this is true not only about war between two nations, it's also true about the predicament of every individual. I have a friend of mine with whom I have a running argument whether there is any element of freedom of choice left in the human condition. Are human beings, in fact, free to choose for themselves? My friend argues that human beings have no element of freedom, and he's not alone in this. He can actually cite many very, very respected thinkers in this to support him. In fact, this was a major theological dispute in the Middle Ages, whether human beings have freedom of choice and whether they are completely under the yoke, under the compulsion of necessity. This is the freedom versus necessity debate. Freedom versus necessity. One group argues that individuals are free. They have freedom of choice, therefore they can choose to act in this manner or that manner. The other group argues, no, they don't have any freedom of choice, or this freedom of choice is an illusion. The individual concerned may think that he is freely choosing what he is going to do, but in point of fact, the outcome of his thinking and therefore his choice will be this is already foreordained because of various factors that have gone on, factors far beyond his control. So, two completely different perspectives. And by the way, this debate between freedom and necessity remains inconclusive. This is a debate that has not been resolved, and nowadays nobody even tries to resolve this debate. Uh, so now, when it comes to certain conditions, certain situations, you feel that the outcome is already foreordained. That was why I said a year ago that Israel will attack Iran. Now, in order to understand this, let me give you an analogy, an example. We are familiar with the game of chess. When the game of chess opens, there are hundreds of possibilities. But with each movement of the various pieces on the chessboard, that freedom of choice is getting reduced, reduced, reduced. And then finally, you reach what is called a stalemate. Then you cannot move. Then there is no more freedom of movement, no more freedom of choice. Now, it's not that life began in that manner. It is that through our many wrong choices, wrong decisions, we brought ourselves to a point where we have ruined our freedom of choice, and therefore now we are completely under the principle of necessity. Things will happen in this manner. To make it clearer, let me give another example. Now, suppose I climb to the top of my house. I'm totally free to climb or not to climb. And there is no limitation to my freedom. I can walk up 10 miles and walk down also. I can decide to go up. I can also decide to come down before I complete the journey. Now, assume that I climb to the top of the house. I'm standing there. Then I have two possibilities, either to come down via the staircase or to jump down from there, knowing fully well that if I jump down, I'll break my neck. I'll invite my death. Now, even at that point, I have freedom of choice to jump or not to jump. But once I jump, my freedom of choice is zero. Zero. I have to come down because I have subjected myself to the necessity of the operation of the gravitational forces. This is how the human situation works. We have freedom of choice, but only up to a point, beyond which forces other than our freedom of choice act upon us, and therefore a wise approach to life is to look after ourselves or to guard and guide our activities in such a manner that we don't bring ourselves to the point of stalemate in life. For example, people decide to end their life or people commit suicide only because they think that they have brought themselves to a stalemate in their life. Now, therefore, these are issues about which we need to become aware. It's good to become aware of them. So, my point was that over a period of time, at least over a period of 20 years, and more particularly from the moment the October 7 attack took place, because I am very clear that Hamas would not attack or could not have attacked Israel on the scale at which the attack was done, the manner in which it was done, and the provocation that was writ large over it without Iran instigating it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So, if you ask me where is the beginning of this Iran-Israel war, in the immediate historical context, it is 7th of October 2023. So, from that time onwards, I've been watching the scenario, and it was very clear to me that from the perspective of Israel, Israeli security will never be in a satisfactory state unless the Iran question is settled. Now, the reason I said that Israel will attack Iran within 3 months of settling Hezbollah was that at that time a secret meeting was convened by Benjamin Netanyahu of his chief security staff, the Israeli army major top brass, and the intelligence agencies like Mossad, and gave them a mandate. This was not widely reported in the media at that time, therefore this would have escaped a notice. The mandate that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu gave to this group of people, the think tank, was to devise a plan to attack Iran particularly two things: Iranian nuclear facilities and Iranian missile facilities. Because from Netanyahu's point of view, the two major threats to Israeli security are the prospect of Iran developing the ugly bomb, the nuclear bomb. Secondly, the delivery system. You can have a bomb, but if you can't deliver the bomb of the nuclear weapon, then it's as good as not having it. And the really decisive issue here is the great strides, great progress that Iran achieved in missile technology. So it was imperative for Israel to destroy these two capabilities of Iran, and he gave this mandate to this group to plan a comprehensive and devastating attack. And I thought that given the degree of Israeli preparedness, this attack would be launched in 3 months, but it took much more time than that. That's okay. Now the problem is, now that this has happened, in my opinion, and remember, one of the videos I shared with you about this entire scenario is that in spite of all the overview that we have, I still said that Israel is acting foolishly, and the more it tries to work on the premise that it can secure its security only by destroying others, the more it will make its own existence untenable. I said that. I said the Jews will not live in peace in the foreseeable future anywhere in the world. I said it at that time a year ago. I still stand with what I said. So now my apprehension is even more confirmed. By taking this step, inevitable step, I admit, from Israel's point of view, this is not my opinion. I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective. By taking this, what seemed to be the most inevitable, irreducible choice of attacking Iran in order to destroy these two key facilities, key capabilities, Israel has rendered its survival even more difficult. In other words, Israel has expedited precisely the coming into being of that very nightmare which made it act in this manner. And this is one of the ironies in history. And if you look at the Greek context, Athenian context, you have stories like, for example, stories of Oedipus the king. He runs away from his native country of Corinth in order to falsify or in order to prevent the fulfillment of a prophecy. And he comes to another country, Thebes, and that is where destiny willed that this curse should come upon him. So by running away from the curse, he fulfills the curse. And I'm afraid Israel is today finding itself, whether Benjamin Netanyahu and his great brains realize it or not, I'm afraid Israel has come into a state where this pattern in history will begin to operate. Namely, the more you try to make yourself secure, the more insecure you yourself make your situation. So, what on the face of it seems a massive blow, a kind of legendary, heroic, mind-blowing blow struck on Iran, could well be one of the most regrettable steps Israel has taken. And there are many reasons for it. Paucity of time will not allow me to look into them. I'll deal with the situation one after the other. So please remember that when we come across important historical developments, unless and until we have a philosophical perspective, we will not be able to understand the meaning of what's happening. Unfortunately, because of the dominance of the media, both the mainstream media and the social media, meaning has become a casualty. People are only excited about the sensational things. Sensationalism is inimical or opposite to seeking the meaning of. And only understanding the meaning can enrich us. Sensations last for a moment, they disappear. Nothing is left behind. Whereas meaning dwells with us. So my effort, my attempt will be to try and highlight the meaning of whatever is unfolding itself right in front of our eyes, very significant events, so that we get to know the patterns working behind the visible sensational things that are unfolding day, minute after minute, hour after hour, or hour by hour. The situation in this region is changing. So it's extremely difficult to predict what kind of turn it will take, but we can have an overall, a bird's eye view from which certain patterns can be discerned, and my attempt will be to try and familiarize you with those patterns. So an extremely intriguing situation, a very worrisome development, and an extremely significant issue, and perhaps an opportunity for us to learn some deeper patterns, deeper insights into history. Thank you very much.